Thank you. Well, welcome to all of you. I'm Kevin Watkins. I'm director here at ODI. Just occasionally we have a guest that really doesn't need much introduction, and I am going to introduce Julia properly in a moment, but this is one of those days, so you're very welcome here to ODI. I wanted to mention to all of you, if you want to participate in Twitter discussions, the hashtag is hashtag edu4, not the number 4, all. And today's conversation with you is going to focus on the Education for All agenda. But I wanted to start, if I may, by just saying a few introductory remarks, Julia, before we kick off. I think, as all of you will know, Julia was Prime Minister of Australia from 2010 to 2013, 3 years and 3 days, as you say in the book. And before that was Education Minister. And actually, in preparing for this, I have to admit to my shame that until yesterday I hadn't read the book. And I asked one of our staff if they would go out and get one, and we couldn't get one from the local Waterstones, but it turned out that somebody in the building had one. And they lent it to me. And the reason I'm looking a bit bleary-eyed, I was actually planning to read the education chapter. But I ended up reading the whole book between the hours of 8 o'clock and 2:30. For those of you who haven't read it, I really recommend it, because it's an extraordinary, I mean, the journey you describe is an extraordinary journey, and different people will take different things out of it. But for me, there are two really standout things, which is one, these cast iron values that you project through the book. And I think many of us have cast iron values, or we try to have cast iron values. But your ability to translate those values into practical politics, I think is an extraordinary distinguishing feature of your career. And it comes out in a lot of different ways in the book, actually. And one of the ways, I think, which you describe in a lot of detail, is how you set up the emissions trading scheme, which was formidably difficult politics that you navigated your way through. And it's linked to, what you describe at the end of the book as your values as an Australian about, a country held in trust for future generations, as you describe it. And I think you're taking that set of values, turning it into an emissions trading scheme in formidably difficult circumstances, I think was a fantastic triumph. We all saw the misogyny speech, but actually the chapter that you do on gender, I think is an extraordinary set of insights into the power of attitudes, and your ability to stand back from what was some pretty shocking stuff in the political context, to really reflect on the way that very deeply ingrained attitudes, unconsciously held, can hold people back and shape the way that we all behave. So there are great insights there as well. I did read the chapter on education in great detail, but before I read it, you have this wonderful piece where you did, which you actually attribute partly to Alan Milburn.
Yes.
Where you say that one of the things he said to you was that you need to be able to put on one side or two sides of A4 your grand narrative for how what you're going to do in government reflects your values. And if I may, I just wanted to quote from one part of it that I pulled out. So, and this is, as you described, that your parents, who had a very abbreviated education, and that they really instilled in you the vital importance of education. And this is what you say in the notes, that education was not just, that they taught you that education was not just the key to a good job, but the foundation stone of a good life. Driven by these values, under my leadership, I'm determined that our nation should honour its belief in a fair go by giving the best education to every child. For a child born in today's Australia, their birthright should be the best education that our prosperous country can provide. And I thought, what a wonderful way of framing the Education for All agenda. This is a sort of global birthright in a way, and that's what you've turned your attention to now. There were 4 distinctive things about education that not as Prime Minister but as Education Minister, that you brought, and which I think we're going to talk about in conversation as well. But they really stood out to me as being overwhelmingly relevant for the Education for All agenda that we're all trying in our own way to influence. And one of them was that, you know, you highlight the fact that, you know, when you became Education Minister, it was impossible to find out about the performance of individual schools. And you created the My School site in order to break through this information black hole that parents and kids across the country were facing. And, you know, it's a deep concern that many of the developing countries that we work in, that information is still not available. So, you know, this is a global deficit there. There was a really key part, which is this basic idea that funding for schools should be linked to the needs of pupils, this idea of equity, that public spending was there, you know, not just to fund education in general, but to overcome disadvantage and to provide more for the most disadvantaged kids. And then your engagement with the business community of bringing them in to help identify the sort of social needs of different schools across the country. And the early childhood interventions, which were obviously absolutely fundamental. Obviously, we're not here today to talk about Australia, but about the global education challenge. And I guess, as you know better than many of us, that we're at quite a curious watershed in a way, that we're about to adopt this very ambitious set of new goals. Universal secondary education, universal childhood education, access to technical and vocational provision. And that's all great. But we're adopting these goals having failed to achieve a much more modest set of goals about universal primary education, that we still have 57 million primary school age kids who aren't in school, and that number is flatlined. So the backdrop is not great. And then beyond the access challenge, we have this quality challenge that so many kids, you know, millions of children, 245 million according to the Global Monitoring Report, are coming out of 5 years of schooling without basic literacy and basic numeracy skills. You know, if we look around the world, the Syria crisis, at South Sudan, at the Central African Republic, at the DRC, you know, the post-emergency, the emergency situation in Nepal, that as a global community, we're pretty abysmal at responding to the needs of kids caught in conflict. And then there are these dreadful gender gaps and deeper disparities and inequalities that are holding us back and threatening the whole SDG enterprise. And it really strikes me in a way that, you know, that what comes out of things that I've heard you say in other contexts, that, you know, if we get education wrong, it's going to be the first domino that topples the other 17 sustainable development goals, because we're not going to achieve the poverty targets, we're not going to achieve the nutrition targets. So there's a lot riding on this. And what I wanted to talk through with you in this conversation is how we deliver on the ambition. But maybe before we get into that, if we could just start to hear from you about your passion for education and how you see the great challenges facing you as chair of the Global Partnership for Education.
Sure, thank you. Well, I feel like I need to start with an apology that I've kept you up half the night reading the book. I've met lots of people who have read the book. One of the things that happens when you're visible as a former Prime Minister is people run up to you to tell you what they've thought of the book, but I think you're the first person I've met who's read it in one night, so thank you for that. It's great to be here and to be able to have this conversation. And I still feel like I am relatively new to this global discussion about education. I come with a set of understandings from my own domestic context, but it's only a year and a bit that I've chaired the Global Partnership for Education. I started last March. And for us, I think where we are positioned now kind of mirrors what's happening with the global education debate, which is we are conscious of the dimensions of the need and how much lift the whole world is going to have to do if we're going to have any prospect of realising the Sustainable Development Goal. So we're conscious of the need. We've got an operational model in country that is increasingly robust and worked through. I mean, GPE is a relatively new organisation coming out of the UN Fast Track initiative. It's taken time to build the country-led development model around planning that we see as the particular GPE piece. But I think we are getting to the stage where we can say with real confidence that that's a model that works and a model that can work at a standard of excellence and should hold the confidence of donors and the global community. But even when we've got to that stage of saying this is a model that works, we need to think very forensically about the capabilities that will have to be added to an organisation like GPE and to the world's global education community if we are going to bridge the gap between the Millennium Development Goal, as yet unrealised, and the full power of the Sustainable Development Goal. Now, in the language, that is manifesting as a conversation about how do we upscale GPE into being a truly global fund for education with the same sort of size and heft of the global funds we see in health. I think that's a good conversation to be having because it's all about lift and upscaling. But as we have it, we've got to be pretty mindful of the differences between education and health, and that we wouldn't want to lose in the yearning for a big global fund some of the very special things that have made this genuine partnership a different kind of operational model. So, you know, as the world settles the SDGs and then turns its eyes to implementation, I think GPE is going to be on a parallel journey of how do we lift and build. I would love it if we woke up in a world where, you know, we'd gone from where we are now with the amount of money invested into education into the amount of money we know from things like the Global Monitoring Report is needed, an extra $39 billion a year from external financing. But having been in politics long enough to be a boiled pragmatist, I know that you don't jump from where we are to $39 billion more in one big leap. And recognising that, I think it's going to be a journey of working out the new capabilities, getting confidence that those new capabilities can be built, and then getting donors to come and assist with the development, the seed financing, and ultimately the scaling of them. The live conversation about a new capability at the moment is one that ODI is contributing to so well, which is the additional capability the world needs for children in crisis and conflict. So I genuinely hope that across the meetings to come this year, with the Oslo summit very close in time now, that we do see progress on that.
Thanks. Can